Turn right onto US 206 North. Yeah, I'm not pulling in front of these guys. I'm just going to let that traffic clear out. Do this nice and safe. You know when things go wrong? Things go wrong when you're under pressure is when things go wrong. And I'm under a fair amount of pressure from the landlords, my future-to-be landlords,
turn right onto New Jersey 94 North.
to get this lease signed. As soon as I told them I was sending it to the lawyer for review, suddenly having through the holiday weekend, going into, I guess it's Memorial Day, was not acceptable, and the other broker was putting pressure on them, and they had 2 people lined up ready to sign right now. So here I am taking a day off from work, coming from a chase that I drove into Jersey for, off my normal route, to make sure that I was at the bank well before bank hours are over, which is 5 o'clock today. It's only 3:50, so I left myself some good margin, but I did it way here on this side because holiday weekend, rain, traffic, and thankfully it's going quite well. But you know, first of all, things do go wrong when you're under pressure like this, and they go wrong in threes. I'm not superstitious. So I am doing my damnedest to keep thing number 1 from going wrong in the first place. So that led me to take a day off from work, you know, even though I work from home still. And then, you know, home affairs rear their, you know, head. And I managed those so that no affairs at home interfered with me leaving in time to leave margin for the bank, margin for the drive, margin for the traffic. And not only that, I am picking up my kid a full hour ahead of scheduled signing time so that they can come with me and give the final go-ahead as to whether I can, you know, whether I should sign this lease, because I cannot sign it right down to that last second. I don't have to take this place. It's not even June, and I have all of June at my current place, and my last day is, I guess, June 30th. I have to be out July 1st. So I wanted July 1st to be my move-in date at a new place. Not a lot of margin. That means I have to have it all emptied out and have enough for living at the new place. A quick crossover like that is sometimes pretty painful. One uses extended stay places or taps neighbors. Wow, the artwork on this drive is just gorgeous. I'm taking a very different route than I normally take. I will also point out that I'm enjoying the power of 2 phones, but before I discuss that, I will point out, and let's see, so the 1s and the 2s and the 3s are all around you. I saw a truck getting ready to pull out in front of me until he saw me, so, you know, I'm going the speed limit perfectly legit, so all radars up. So, one of the things that went wrong, it's not counting against my strikes for today, but part of the thing that's making so much pressure is that instead of a July 1st lease start date, the new landlords, my prospective landlords, were insisting on a mid-June start date. Waiting the full month was too much. It just couldn't be done. There were too many people looking at the place, and so I yielded. And they told me if I accepted the June 15th start date, then I have the place. That's a very, very big incentive, temptation. So I did the additional work they needed me to do, which was give them a lot of my wife's information, which I was very unhappy with because my wife isn't going on the lease, only I'm on the lease. And so I gave them the information. I agreed to a June 15th start date.
Turn right onto New Jersey 15 South, New Jersey 94 North.
And they asked me when I could sign the lease, and I'm like, oh, well, you know, I have to have a lawyer look at it. We're going into a holiday weekend, and Monday things are going to be closed, so Tuesday is probably the soonest the lawyer, because I got to give the lawyer more than 1 business day turnaround. And so
right onto New Jersey 15
it turned out we
New Jersey
scheduled
94 North.
the signing for Thursday. Now, that was a lot of time, and I was actually surprised they were going to give me till Thursday. So I was ready to go to Wednesday, which also gives me
Keep left to stay on New Jersey 15 South.
another weekend of looking at places to have more than one bird in hand. And so that was a very good prospect, but they apparently got tuned into it or sincerely have other people looking. I'm not sure which to believe. But they said, oh, yep, waiting until next week is too long. They didn't even say that. They said, you know, when can you get in to sign the lease? And I'm explaining to them, look, going into a holiday weekend, even just getting the bank checks is going to be a challenge. So it became very clear that, you know, I had to make this happen today, Friday, or risk losing the place. And it's a perfect place, except, you know, the explore exploit algorithm. I wasn't even 30% of the way into the time I was willing to spend. I have a whole month still to work with. I was maybe about 10% in, but I found the perfect place. It's got a lot going for it. And so, oh wow, there's such beautiful stuff on this drive. You probably can hear the drive I'm on, but taking the back routes to drive through New Jersey on the way into New York City has so many interesting little neighborhoods, the restaurants, the farmers markets, the ice cream places, the country stores, the quaint houses, and the tons of houses for sale, right? You wouldn't think it was such a good seller's market because there's a lot for sale, you know? I guess with the interest rates going up, people are figuring, you know, I better sell now before no New Yorkers want these rural houses anymore. So that's what's driving me out of my current place, a little beautiful, quaint little cottage place that I talk about. It's kind of like living in a bed and breakfast, except you make your own breakfast and your own bed. However, it's delightful. It's got this huge yard that I have done fun things with, like trampoline and zip line. The fire pit was already there, but I built up the fire pit to even be bigger and more beautiful using bricks from Hurricane Sandy devastation to build it up and give it a very unique look. It's been complimented a number of times, so I sort of internalized this and took it as my own. But, you know, best laid plans. The landlords, God bless them, I like them. I wouldn't say I love them, but, you know, I like them enough to not raise a fuss that they want to sell, they want to cash in on the market. But I don't love them so much that I would leave earlier than my lease, as they had suggested several times that I am invited to do with no penalty. And in that time period, the interest rates started going up, and I started talking to people like, if I were to buy around here, what would I expect to spend? And when I told them what my landlords were expecting to get from that place, the laughing was hearty and out loud. So, you know, I wish them the best, but I wish myself better. Despite wishing myself better, I'm moving back to Staten Island to be close to my kid. I love my kid. My kid needs me. My kid needs me desperately. And I need to be
Continue straight to stay on New Jersey 15 South.
right there close. But not so close that the grandparents aren't closer. I am not going to be offering rides. Having the extra driver in the picture where, you know, my child's parent on that side is not a driver. And this limits my kid's opportunities. And so me being close, it's going to be, oh, tap him for driving. He works from home. Maybe, I don't know. We're going to see. But no, every single time I'm going to say, learn to drive. Get your license. There's no reason you shouldn't be driving. You have a car. So I'm there for when my kid calls crying.
In 600 feet, continue straight to stay on New Jersey 15 South.
And am I going to publish this? My stories are mine to tell.
Continue straight to stay on New Jersey 15 South.
So I'm being yanked around right now by the landlords, the prospective landlords, pressuring me to be there on a Friday to sign. I made very sure that my kid has an opportunity to be involved in the decision of taking this place. I shot 2 videos for them, one a thorough walkthrough on the inside of the place, and the other a thorough walk around the lake of the local park, which is a park they are familiar with, which is attached to other parks and part of the Greenbelt system, which has the wonderful populated part of the park with a man-made lake and the heron roosting area and all that. And then it has the less populated part of the park, which is not terribly different than the Delaware Water Gap, where I currently live. My stories are mine to tell. If anyone's getting bent, this is just life. This is just life. You know, life is full of ups and downs, and when the best people you have to talk to about it is your YouTube followers, because they follow you because of a little bit of this, a little bit of that, your integrated life, then all the more welcome they are to know about the trials and tribulations of life, because really, isn't that what it's all about? I plan to blow up on the YouTubes real soon. I got 1 million views here and there. Oh, I swoon. So, I stretch. The poetry pops into my head now and again. Not all of equal quality. And I wrote a macro to format that poetry, and that I did during my lunch break, which I actually plan on doing now, even during the business days, because what I do with my lunch break is my own business. I will front load the eating at breakfast time and eat a little more at dinner, and do starving artists right through lunch. There's nothing wrong with that. And even so, there's a little bit of flex time in working from home. People are fine with you doing an errand here, as long as you put in a little more time there, get all your work done. And really, in my field, where it's all about specialized knowledge, deep specialized knowledge, you have to keep the saw sharp. You have to, I used a ton of metaphors before, I'll use a ton of metaphors again. You have to keep irons in the fire. You have to throw your hat in the ring. You have to have skin in the game. Call it what you will, but if you're not walking the walk, you can't talk the talk. To be genuine in any field that requires specialized knowledge, you need to be conducting experiments, pushing the edges, testing the boundaries, collecting data, coming up with hypotheses, doing things to test your hypotheses, and then make decisions based on that and put out more stuff. It's mostly the publishing process, and it's mostly what once upon a time I called hittailing, because the little tests you put out are never gangbuster successes. They're rarely, hit it out of the ballpark, right? I have 2 million view videos, and then the next one up is like 60,000 or something. So the vast majority of hits, aside from the super popular ones, come from the long distribution tail, the long tail of the 1/x distribution curve. There are other x's, there are other formulas of 1/x. You will hear the Ziff distribution curve, you will hear the Pareto wealth distribution curve, the population curve, the logistics curve, and they're all variations on the same concept, in that things that are popular have a tendency towards infinite popularity because, humans copy humans, the echo chamber. Top, 40 charts receive more than 40% of the music traffic. They receive like 90% of the music listening activity. It might be changing a little bit as the filters get more perfect and the channels get more numerous. That is, your ability to do search over what's available, and the number of things you can tune into or partake of what's available. So it's a two-sided thing. There are search filters on the one hand, and there are channels on the other hand. More perfect search filters and more numerous channels conspire together to create a more perfect 1/x distribution curve of what's popular. So what comes in past that spike of popularity as you reach the inflection point, and then the long tail that goes off as infinite in variety as the popular stuff is infinite in popularity, you get little hits. You get little hits in your long tail, hits in the long tail. That's hittailing. You look at the little hits in your long tail and you read those like the tea leaves, and it becomes kind of a suggestion box, a writing topic, a blogging, a vlogging topic suggestion box. You listen to those suggestions and you decide how much and whether you need to compromise your integrity to pander to what people would like to hear more of from you. What are the folks interested in? Well, the folks are interested in tiny virtual servers from me. The folks are interested in QEMU on the Macintosh from me. The folks are interested in finger magic from me. That's kind of nice. I'll give you some finger magic. There's a little bit of Raspberry Pi interest left. But what I really want to talk about is why the time is right to get your butts to Linux. Old school, non-graphic user interface, text-based, terminal, command line interface, Linux. Very much like Unix. The time has come to understand why Unix has taken over the world, and why Linux is the kind of sort of version of Unix that has taken over the world. They're different, but they're the same, but they're different, but they're the same. The time has come to understand that stuff. The time has come to understand ye old text editor wars, VI versus Emacs. The time has come to understand the vibes that these two text editors represent, and why the text editor wars are both so decisive and still of great significance today. The time has come to know why VS Code
Continue straight to stay on New Jersey 15 South.
And many things associated with it are a vendor trap, with Microsoft desperately yielding to the new Unix/Linux order, but doing so in a way where their control of your access to things, because they control the operating system, so they control the laptop, and they control your startup procedure, and they control your web browser, and they control your terminal software, and they control, and the list goes on. And using that control, they control your text editor through VS Code. By leveraging that control of the doorway, of the passageway to the world that cannot be denied you, which is Linux, Unix, and free and open source, they can use the control of the doorway to make it an Azure way. Okay, geek joke. They can use control of the doorway to make sure that you are always and forever corralled, that the Microsoft sheep are always and forever corralled to Microsoft products and services, which even if free today, which even if high quality and free today, come at a price. Come at a price of your habits, your expectations, your general understanding of how things work, your long-term muscle memory, and your ability to do anything in the world of tech without having Microsoft have their hand in your wallet. Listen to my last live streaming video. I go into it in greater depth. I record a macro called I'm Still the Wolf. I'm still the wolf. Still have it on. I'm going to my lease signing right now. I felt the need to still be the wolf. A shirt picked out for me by my kid before they were even old enough to remember, to commit it to long-term memory. I had to tell them, you know, my t-shirts, this is the one you picked out for me. And many times I had thought of getting rid of it because I don't channel the wolf very often. I am not one to channel a wolf, but my kid schooled me. My kid schooled me in Dungeons and Dragons and humaneness, letting the fire elves free and not the fire fairies free and not trying to turn them into a cool flamethrower, figuring out whether I have to use them in serial or parallel for their best flame. They made sure that even in the world of Dungeons and Dragons, where it was just imagination, do not nurture such dark thoughts. Okay, you're right. So my kid taught me that even though I shouldn't be cruel in the world of Dungeons and Dragons, be ready to channel my inner wolf. You need to be the wolf from time to time because you will encounter the wolf from time to time. And so as a reader of sci-fi and fantasy and fiction, there's no way I can hold a discussion like that without thinking the vampire Lestat, who, very classic scene, while still human, fights off a pack of wolves. Fights off a pack of hungry wolves. And impresses the local vampire who's been stalking him so much that instead of draining him to death, he says, "Oh, you'd make a good vampire. Lestat here. Let me convert you." And, that's the premise of, I guess, the second big Interview with a Vampire series. This is Twilight before Twilight, right? Who needs Twilight? Anne Rice got this so right with the Vampire series. And, most people know it by the movies. And just like all of these things, the movie doesn't do justice. This thing goes deep. The turning of children before they're old enough to be vampires and what that does to their psychology, all that stuff is in these books, man. It's good stuff. So the vampire Lestat, while he was still the human Lestat, was powerful enough to barehandedly fight off hungry wolves. Badass. Always impressed me. And, is also someone who falls into depression. Because these vampires, they live so long that instead of just cashing it in, they often go into this hibernation state, which, in the process of not feeding, they kind of dry up and shrivel up, but their senses get hyper aware, and they're kind of aware of the outside world, even though they're in this dehydrated, hibernating state. All these wonderful concepts. I'm sure channeling things from real life. I couldn't give you the exact analogy or metaphor for what Anne Rice is channeling there, but you can bet that's channeling some powerful real world parallels. So, Lestat, in one of those hibernated states, hears rock and roll. He hears the evolution of rock and roll music. And this is what wakes him up. It touches him. A sympathetic vibration breaks him out of the hibernation. And, one of the things here is that if you aren't brought out of it in some way, you could still die. All those stories of the vampires being killed while they slumber. This is a real threat for vampires if their hidey hole was uncovered. They're at their weakest. So, the idea of being in a coffin to get away from everything as a practical alternative to death. Go into a depressive, hibernated state with a heightened sense of awareness and wait.
Use the left 2 lanes to take the I-80 East ramp to New York.
So Lestat touched me deeply. Not only all these things about how they wake up from their slumber, but also how he fought off wolves
Use the left 2 lanes to take the I-80 East ramp.
leading into his vampire conversion. It impressed the vampire who saw he had what it took. You know, he gave him the gift. So I channel the wolf, and I think of Lestat, and I think of the wolves I encounter. One will encounter wolves in their life. And when you are a sensitive type, one who is easily upset by things because of your empathy, because of your ability to feel the emotions of others, to use your imagination to put yourself in their head and to thereby become entangled with them, you are able to be bullied easily. You are easily hurt. You are easily betrayed. Your trust is easily broken. So I was born that way, to a set of parents who were of the age of emptiness, the American dream, the Brady Bunch, and the ticky-tacky houses, and I work hard so you can have the food on your plate and the roof over your head. Where's your gratitude? That's what I provide. Now, my dad wasn't really like that, but there was a lot of that in the age I grew up, which is colored positive by such things as Stranger Things and the E.T. movie. Those kind of capture the suburban spirit of the times. So if there was any good that came out of those times, it's by parents who are so disconnected from the emotions and activities of their kids that those kids could go out in the then perceived safe. They're no safer than today. It's just media and the building up of the idea of stranger danger. But in those days, you could take your bike out and ride all around the neighborhood, go to the neighboring neighborhood. I used to ride my bike into the city, into Philadelphia, in the times, leading up to the crack epidemic. It wasn't as cleaned up as it is today. In the times of the pre-Disney-ification of Times Square, New York, I would take the, 30th Street Station train after riding my bike into Philadelphia to the Penn Station in New York City and go to that seedy Times Square. I mean, I was much too young for the peep shows, although I might have enjoyed them. But at 12 years old, 13 years old, I was doing things which if other parents knew, much less my own parents, they would flip out. They would flip out. Oh my God, can you imagine? I couldn't take the metro train, the expensive train, the Amtrak. I couldn't take the commuter train. That was too expensive. But I was able to cobble together enough money. My comic book money could pay my way to New York City. I could even take the train to Philadelphia if I wanted to cut the first part of the bike ride out by taking the R6 or the R7. And so that was either the era I grew up in, or that was who I was in those days. And you look at the hovering helicopter parents today who give their kids allergies by sterile environments that don't allow the body to develop anti-fragile capabilities. And you go, oh my God, no wonder anxiety and depression and existential crisis is the real pandemic of the era, of this age. Right? Am I not right? So, I'm going back to Staten Island because I got to be near my kid and I have to double my living expenses. Oh! So I'm going to cut to the bone on my expenses, income and expenses. I'm going to cut out everything streaming. I'm going to cut out everything, extra, and just keep what I have to. And then if I'm still running negative, I'm going to have to adjust other things and get some lawyers involved. And So that's cutting to the bone and then cutting the bone. And I'm doing it because I have to move back to Staten Island. There's really no choice in this matter. I looked at living across the bridge. That undoes the whole... If I'm moving back for my kid, I'm not moving back to on the other side of an expensive toll bridge. I'm moving back so that I can be the genie. Poof, what do you need? Now, I am not a poof, what do you need genie. That is unhealthy. That's why I don't do web development. When you program a poof, what do you need genie, a web server answers the miscellaneous requests coming in at any time from anyone with any variety on the request. You can't anticipate it, you can't control it. It's completely open-ended. You got to deal with load balancing, and all that complexity drives you to cloud services so that you don't have to manage it. And you got all these dependencies being knitted into your base knowledge of being a tech person. It's stupid. Everyone doing web development is blind to the fact that they are the genie from Aladdin. Poof, what do you need? Poof, what do you need? Singing that song. And everyone pretending that it's the right thing is Prince Ali pretending they're someone they're not. Because when Node.js goes out of style and VS Code goes out of style, they are royally effed. Can't happen. Ruby on Rails went out of style. Active Server page went out of style. Netscape went out of style. Come on, people. Everything goes out of style. Everything tied to the platform du jour goes out of style. Because they're not styles, they're fads. Current tech, no matter how popular, no matter how mainstream and, fact of life you think it is a house of cards. Mostly centered around the concept of web development. Not all tech is web development. So, if not web development, then what, Mike? Says you. Just general running of scripts. General running of scripts. They don't have to be in response to an HTTP request. You take the general running of scripts and you make them occur in response to a HTTP request, and now you've got a web server. Not an uncommon thing. A web server, writing a web server is a one-line thing in Python. It's built into Python. And then there's lots of different ways aside from that to get a web server. So creating the context where your script can be served as a result of an HTTP call is a trick, and web development is the insistence on the using of that trick, despite all alternatives that may get the job done just as well. So what alternatives? Batch files, scheduling things to occur daily. If you need to pull some data, do some stuff with that data, combine it with other data, transform that data, format that data for human consumption, and send it on to some people who need that data, you can schedule it. And because you're scheduling it on a, known server with a known workload, you have finite, predictable, resources, calculatable resources that you can apply and slice and divvy up and allocate just the way you want, knowing that it's going to happen with a high degree of reliability every day. Now, you might think, oh, that's a pretty shallow and hollow trick compared to a web server that can, allow you to reach it on your mobile phone and have a pretty web page with the user interface, because it's all about the sexy user interface, right? You'd be surprised. You'd be very surprised how much value can be delivered by doing something on a scheduled basis every day. So if not a scheduled basis, say it needs to be on demand. So you do something which on a scheduled basis checks for instructions sent to a particular email address, checks a Twitter for certain things posted, checks a Usenet, listens for text messages being sent to it. There's all kinds of ways that you can get a message to a server without it having to be a web server. I mean, my favorite is to just check an email address, because then, you just pick any old email address. Use a Gmail one if you want. You have the server check it every 5 seconds if you want. It seems a little overkill. I might do every minute. So someone says to you, oh, can you do this? Can you send this report? I say, yeah, no problem. I send an email with a keyword to an email address, and I say, you'll have it in about 3 minutes, because I know the web server will check every minute. What they're asking for takes about a minute to generate. So you should say 4 minutes. You always want to double it. So I know, optimistically, it can be done as quick as 2 minutes, but pessimistically, it may take as long as 4 minutes, because there's also the time of, attachments being sent by email. Yeah, you can send the email from that server, and I don't even need, I'll spare you these instructions now. I'm back in familiar area. I'm back on 280. So the email that you send from that scheduled server can be HTML. You can have a rudimentary user interface right in the email saying click this for this and click that for that. Of course, it's not going to be very interactive, because all these email programs have locked that kind of stuff down to prevent, phishing and hacking and all that for security's sake. But you can bring them to a website, which you can run a website, right? I'm not saying don't do web development, but if you do web development, forget pretty user interfaces. Just make it so that if someone receives an HTTP request with the correct token on the request, because when you say click here for this and click there for that, you can make sure that it's only valid within a certain time window. You can make sure it's only valid when clicked from a genuine email. There's a whole lot of stuff you can do to, make web development that isn't web development. It's just responding to an HTTP, or better still, an HTTPS request. So what else can I have to say? There's lots of other tricks there. So how do you do this scheduling? Do you have to use some fancy product? No, it's built into Linux. Oh, so you have to know how to write some fancy, maybe Unix bash scripts to start and stop services? No, there's a nice protocol of clean little text files that you just drop into place according to a certain convention, like any other framework you use. You got to learn the convention, what you put where that has what meaning. But you just drop those files into location, having the admin level privileges on that machine, and bam, you now have a command with start and stop and restart instructions. Oh, so it's running mysteriously, so you can't really see it running? No, those services can actually be channeled through a visual interface. Now, when I say a visual interface, I'm usually not talking about desktop graphics. I'm talking about what you would call a console, terminal, text window. The text window, like when you used to watch computers boot up and you saw the text scroll past you before it was Windows. They hide all that from you now with the EFI boot up procedures. However, it's still all happening invisibly in there in the background, and you need to know that scripts are running. And those scripts that run, you can have a window onto them, even when they're running as a Linux service. So you could say, oh, I wonder what it's up to now. So I log into these things. I log in, I connect to it. I open, if you're on Windows, you can open what's called PowerShell. You can run a program called SSH, give it a certain address, some certain login criteria, because security. And you then, that text window, instead of being a window to your local computer's text capabilities and communication, it's a window to a remote computer's communication. And that remote computer's communication can be an already running session. You can step in the middle of a session, and I do that all the time to see either a heartbeat, every half hour a heartbeat to tell me that this machine is still alive, or the script it's in the middle of. So in this spirit, I almost never do concurrency. Concurrency makes predicting your machine's resource utilization more difficult. There's a concept at infinite resources because of the cloud, because you're working this way especially. Oh, it's a headless server, so you can just fire up 1,000 instances and slam them all against every API and website to do your data collection, and then you can just, keep that pipeline of data running, and you can do times 10,000, times 100,000 of the amount of work you usually do. No. there is no cloud. There's only other people's computers. Resources are resources. So if you want a handle on it, you run stuff sequentially. There are times where you do concurrency, but it's the exception, not the rule, especially while you're learning. So you have stuff scheduled. They happen like one after another or at certain times without the ability to overlap. So if the time of task B comes up and task A is still running, task B just has to wait till task A is done, or you can make them non-blocking and get a form of concurrency that's less damaging than other forms of concurrency because they're doing different things, probably tapping different resources. So you can schedule things at exact times, make them concurrent, non-blocking, and allow them to overlap, but you still space them out knowing how long you think the scripts are going to take to run. That gives yourself a margin of error, and if there is concurrency, it's only little bits of overlapping. What else? These scheduled tasks are actually a master schedule that never quits because syntax isn't going to break. Your scheduled script, once it's running once, isn't going to mysteriously have broken syntax that could stop it inserted into it. And even if it did, it would get caught in a restart loop because that's one of the things that Linux servers do. They restart their services on a checking basis. I usually have mine check every 5 seconds to make sure my scheduler is still running. And so, and this all, by the way, is under something called System D. System D, something that was introduced a few years ago, was embraced first by Debian, the people who embraced the init.d system that came before it. So once again, the innovators in this area is not the large enterprise IBM Red Hat $1 billion. It was unusual to have a $1 billion Linux back in the day. But back in the day, Red Hat Linux, supported, funded by IBM, was the corporate Linux, and it has since grown into things like CentOS, still having the reputation for mission critical, good uptime, good commercial support if you want it. However, it is not where innovation occurs. Innovation occurs on Debian Linux. The first people, and some of the best good guys of the whole picture. As much as I put people down, I don't have enough good things to say about the Debian organization. Their charter, the people, the incorruptible nature of it, and proof in the pudding, canonical, what you know as Ubuntu, or I like to call it Ubuntu, Linux is based on Debian. So Ubuntu is based on Debian. Debian is the Linux that innovates these service start and stop conventions, because all it is scripts in certain locations with certain names, right? You name a directory init.d. That means it's those things where initialization scripts go, but we really want to remind people it's a directory of script files, so we won't just call it init, because that'll look like a program, the init program. It'll confuse people. Perpetually remind them that it's a directory of scripts. So we'll just say init.d. You give things extensions, right? We'll give the directory an extension. So under the init.d folder, and I think /etc, so from root, so much nested discussions. You'll get this over time. But all Linux file systems have the same general directory path, repeated over and over in different places. There's different mount points for the entire Linux directory structure. It's wacky, it's cool. And at the root is something called /etc, but that requires root privilege for root etc. So there's /user/etc. So these things are, directory structures are reproduced where the user is supposed to have the write ability. And in that place, you can put these scripts to control services in the old school way. I learned from one of my YouTube viewers who uses Arch Linux, which I used to think was one of the holdouts, still using the init.d system. I was informed that it's really systemd. Hope I got my names right. Celtic Orthodox Prayer. Celtic Orthodox Prayer tells me that Arch Linux one of the old school holdouts, no graphical desktop unless you really work for it. Yeah. That they moved to System D, that they followed suit. So the rest of the story is that the same Debian organization that innovated init.d also moved to system.d. It's not system.d, it's just system D. So there's that D again. It's conserving the same principle. Oh, the D is not just for directory. The D is for daemon. Linux services are called daemons. Linux daemons, or Unix daemons for that matter, used to be written with bash script, maybe Corn shell script, but more frequently bash scripts, that did a start, that did a stop, that did a restart, all the things you might want to do with a service. Those are daemons. When they're running, it's a running daemon. Those daemons have start, stop, and restart controls. System D has the same D for daemon, but instead of having to be written in bash script and requiring arcane specialized knowledge in yet another language, it requires less arcane and less specialized conventional scripts. You can think of them in terms of YAML files, or XML files, or INI files, or just configuration files. And if you have the correct root, sysadmin, super user level access, you just drop these files into location. Now you have a command. You type command, service space name space start, and that service of that name has started and it's running. It's just like starting something in Nginx or Apache or GNU-corn or any one of these other web servers that you would be using. But instead, you're using something just built into Unix. It's just part of the building capabilities, right? Building capabilities. So how do you do a service? You use less code with less software, with less dependency to get potentially more useful, more predictable, more reliable stuff. It's not difficult, ladies and gentlemen. It's actually easy compared to web development. Web development is a violation of the 80-20 rule because every project is easy and every project feels done until you put a user interface on it. Then you realize I'm only 20% of the way done. I still have 80% of the work still to do. It flips the 80-20 rule upside down. It becomes the 20-80 rule. All the work you've done that made you think you were done is really, in truth, only 20% of the work, and 80% of the work remains because now you got to put a user interface on it. You get it? You get it? Web development is not your friend. Web development is turning you into a lower class citizen, an indentured servant. It is becoming a British cockney versus the aristocracy and the bourgeoisie. The bourgeoisie, and now I'm hitting the traffic. I'm glad I left early. Getting yanked around. Okay. This is ping number 1. It's still only 4:30, and I have a whole hour to get in to pick up my kid, 5:30. And then another whole hour to get to the lease signing, 6:30. So plenty of time to let the kids see the place. And, yeah, thanks, Bert. Thank you so much, Bert. Having a good boss, and sorry, you're going to have some background noise because I need the air conditioning now. Having a good boss, especially in these times of lockdown, is good. People think it's time to go off and work for yourself, and what? Find your own customers, do your own payroll, complicate your taxes, find employees, change your work to management. Just do the thing you love and find a good employer. Someone on the live stream said, "Hey, Mike, who do you work for?" I'm like, "Oh, let me tell you. You ever heard of Asimov magazine? I don't work for them. You ever heard of Analog magazine? I haven't worked for them. But the third runner-up, Ziff Davis, I work for them. The old sci-fi, science fiction, pulp rags of the 50s. Comic books before comic books, man. Close to my heart. Mark Rifkin, you know what I'm talking about. So the stories of robots and spaceships and brains in bottles and all that wonderful stuff from, Lovecraft to space colonization. Think they're different? No, Lovecraft wrote about space colonization, putting brains in jars because it was more efficient. I mean, all these folks channeled so deeply. And, Edgar Allan Poe was a contributor to this. The inventing of the genres. It's exciting stuff to me. And, Marvel gets gobbled up by Disney. DC is part of what? Perlman and some other association, I don't know. But DC doesn't seem all that independent. They seem like pretty big sellouts to corporate world. Ziff Davis, they're not comic books, but they're like one of the other sci-fi rags. They're still independent. Okay, so they were bought by a holding company that made fax software back in the day, because fax software provided such a large infusion of money and then dried up so quickly because of how quickly technology changes, that what do you do when your bread and butter is gone, but you got a lot of money in the bank? You become a holding company. And so for a while, a company called J2, the fax company, became the holding company. They owned Ziff Davis. Ziff Davis was a child company to J2. They have subsequently renamed themselves, making the parent holding company Ziff Davis. So in my mind, I work for Ziff Davis. I work for a 100-year-old paper publishing company that successfully made the transition to the digital age and owns such properties as IGN, PC Mag, Mashable. Those are kind of the three of the big feathers in the cap in the technology region. They also have Everyday Health, Ask Men, What to Expect, and some other health things we bought up. They have Ekahau. So I used to work for Commodore Computers, so wouldn't it be nice to have some technology under the umbrella that's really special? Google Ekahau, E-K-A-H-A-U, I don't know, but those crazy Scandinavians and stuff, they know tech. Scandinavians and the honorary Scandinavians of the Netherlands, which I don't think is really Scandinavia, but the Netherlands, Luxembourg, Benelux, Norway, Benelux. Am I missing one? Well, them plus the Netherlands, they know tech. Between them, you got so many of the big game changers, not the least of which Linux and Python. Linux is Dutch from the Netherlands, and Python is Phoenician? Finland. What are you, Linus? So both of them are clever thieves, though, I will add. Python came from the ABC programming language, which was still an invention of the Netherlands. So at the time, Guido Van Rossum, who created Python, worked for their equivalent of NASA or Space Organization or JPL or whatever you want to call it, the semi-government science company. And at that location, there were some researchers, some education researcher programmer types who made the ABC programming language. I wish I knew their names. But it created many of the tenets we know today in Python, things like white space matters, probably issues of scope and the use of colons. And Guido was working for them at the time and got exposed to that and decided he would create a version of that panders to two factions of tech. What two factions of tech? Well, on the one hand, you got your sysadmins, people you would call today DevOps people, not all that creative in the traditional sense, but they keep the computers running. They're the ones who would write bash scripts, they're the ones who moved on to writing Perl scripts, and they're the ones who moved on today to writing Python scripts, because Guido got it right. Okay, and then there's a very distinctly different faction. You might think they're the same, but they're not. And that's the C programming faction. Those people who write large personal libraries, because there were not large standard libraries of the batteries included, installable or importable external packages and libraries of today. It was very bare bones. There were like 40 commands in C, and that was it. The whole standard C, the C standard specification, didn't have importable or linkable libraries. It had like 40 commands. Everything else you brought to the table. And that crowd is the hardest core of hardcore programmers in quantity, in popular mass. There's more hardcore programmers out there. These days, the kind of people who do Haskell and Lisp and really low-level ASM, assembly language programming, they're hardcore. People who write drivers, optimized drivers for graphics cards and tablets and stuff like that. They're hardcore, on another order. Their minds work differently. A normal human's mind works, call it baseline. An engineer's mind works significantly different, and then people who program in assembly works different to an nth degree beyond engineers. So there's very special people. C programmers come around at the engineering level. There's a lot of them. They're numerous, and they tackle many problem domains in the world. So maybe not as many as sysadmins, what we call today DevOps, but ye old C programmers were the ones to appeal to, because really the operating system was written in C. Unix and Linux were written in C. Everything is really written in C at one point or another, except for Lisp, separate story. Now I just gotta stay alert. The rain's coming down. We're watching for ding number 2. I got past traffic. Keep a nice following distance, especially in light of the rain. Don't be too distracted by talking to the nice people. Okay, so Guido Van Rossum, working for their equivalent of NASA in the Netherlands, as a, intern at a low level for the people who wrote ABC, decided that his Python program, his implementation of ABC, would unify the sysadmins with the C programmers. Oh! And here I am talking to you about it today. Simple as that. You might say there's a third group that he tried to appeal to, and that is the noobs. The newbies, the learners, the greens. People like me, I'm a perpetual newbie. I'm always coming to things fresh. I don't know if I have terrible long-term memory, or if, I think things are too stupid to commit to long-term memory, or that I have had the reset button hit on me so many times, I don't spend a lot of energy trying to commit things to long-term memory, because I'm embittered and feel everything's just going to change in 2 to 5 years anyway. So I'm the perpetual noob. I learn things lightly, and I drop them and walk away from them quickly, because the Amiga, because Active Server Page, because the Coleco Atom before that, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. That's the expression, Mr. GWB. It's a test of intelligence, by the way. George Bush Jr. didn't fully fail the intelligence test. He got the gist of it, and getting the gist counts. He scored like maybe a B. I'm always getting things wrong. I mean, you hear me going, and as Jim Campbell? One of my old Commodore friends once said, when the Germans invaded Pearl Harbor, don't stop him, he's on a roll. I think my reference was to Madame Albright when I meant Madeleine Albright, and John Campbell. John. I said Jim. Is John Campbell? Well, he's some highfalutin board member of some technology thing in Pennsylvania these days, And, you know, I owe a debt of gratitude to him and all the folks like him that I was so angry at during the time I worked for one of the Commodore spin-offs after Commodore went under. But I won't let this degrade to that discussion. You're talking to someone who's been angry at many people many times over my life because I felt betrayed, and I tried to project it externally. But now I know it was projection. I've always really just been angry at myself. I'm angry at this guy for cutting me off. He could have pulled in behind me, but he felt it more appropriate to get his front in and wedge open the opening in front of me more. But, you know, in through the nose, out through the mouth. In through the nose, out through the mouth. 3, 4. Deep and long and up to 10. Except when you're in New Jersey, then you can cut it short at 6. One hour in. I know from my phone it's going to cut the video off, so thanks for joining me. Hope to see you again soon. And don't forget to subscribe. When you tune in again real soon, I'll be doing some of these talking head videos from the new apartment. I'll be signing this lease on in all likelihood tonight. So follow the evolution of my life in this one big integrated thing. Does Mike talk about life? Does he talk about Linux, Python, Vim, and Git? Does he talk about, you know, politics and fatherhood and technology? Yes, I talk about it all, and I blend it all together. And I'm bringing it to you on my YouTube channel here, MIKLEV.